Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 174. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of The Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Stephen C. Harms about his new thriller series. He has published 2 books in this series so far, Give Place to Wrath and The Counsel of the Cunning. In these fast-paced thrillers, Stephen's main character is Roger Viceroy, a veteran police detective in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who is recently divorced, wrestling with his own faith, and extremely good at his job of solving murders. Stephen was inspired to create Roger Viceroy and write this series because he is such a big fan of the genre. His goal with each book is to take a morality message and embed it within a secular mystery. And he is currently working on book number 3. In this episode, I'll chat with Stephen about his writing journey, his plans for this series and how to keep it exciting, and why he chose Milwaukee, Wisconsin as the setting for these stories, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Stephen Harms, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here and look forward to the conversation. I
thought what we could do today is start by talking about your new series. You've got 2 books out in this series, but I think what I want to do is set the series up for readers. So if you don't mind, give us a little background on the series and your main character, and then let's talk about sort of your inspiration for writing this series.
Sure. I think they probably are part and parcel to the 2 questions they're weave together there. So I guess I'll answer it and certainly fire back with any questions that you want additional to what I've covered. But the series was conceived as my, well, first off, let me back up a little bit. I certainly enjoy the thriller, mystery, suspense genres. I believe those are wonderfully written books. I think, I'm just one of those junkies on that sort of genre, and I enjoy reading them. I enjoy watching them if they get to movie theaters, that sort of thing as well. But I was inspired to take a crack at doing it myself, and obviously found some success with it. But the genesis of the books was what I wanted to do was take sort of a morality message and embed it into a secular, mystery, thriller, suspense sort of series around a character, Roger Viceroy. He's a detective, and he is struggling with some of his faith-based ideas and concepts of what's going on with him. So I will say the book is very secular. It's not going to be any different than you would read in other mystery, thriller, suspense sort of stories. But there is this sort of moral faith sort of element softly embedded within. And it was taking basically what I would say universal morality concepts and sort of in a very understated way and implanting them within the storyline such that when the reader gets to the finish line of the books, they may have a little question to themselves about certain things. So that was sort of the challenge for me, is to figure out, could I do that? Because there's, in that genre, there's a lot of morality things to deal with anyway, whether that's murder or trickery or whatever it is. But I wanted to sort of draw a little more attention to it if I could. I figured that out. And so that was the genesis, as I said, the inspiration to do it. The character himself, as I said, Roger Viceroy, is a detective. He is struggling with his own, I guess I'd call it faith-based ideas and concepts. He's coming out of divorce as the book opens in book one. Happy to talk through both books, but that's sort of where he's coming from, and he's got some major difficulties in that area as we get into book one. But it is a message. The titles are taken from Christian scripture, but I don't want to say these are Christian books. I don't think necessarily that that's how they'd be qualified, just because they are very much secular in nature, with just sort of an understated piece of universally accepted kind of moral principles.
Okay, let's talk about each of those books in turn. So the first one you put out, Give Place to Wrath.
Mm-hmm.
Set the stage for us. What can we expect Roger Viceroy to have to be dealing with in that book?
Sure. So the book, obviously being the first one, introduces the readers to him, his character, his struggles, as I've sort of outlined a bit in what I just said. But the book opens with a bombing on a golf course that kills a number of people. And Roger, at that point, is in charge of an agency I had created, actually called the Midwest Region Special Crimes Unit, which was pulled together by 5 states in the Midwest. He's based here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to be assigned the leads on particularly heinous crimes that the governors have the right to just pull into the fray. These units within each state. So Roger's the head of the Wisconsin unit, and it's, as I said, the bombing's placed here in Milwaukee. So he's pulled in right out of the gate, and it's a very mysterious bombing. It's on a golf course, obviously, at a country club. It's not a place you would normally find something like that. And what happens from there is other killings start to occur over a relatively shorter period of time, and each one of them begins to show a pattern and a leave behind of an item that becomes even more of a challenge for him to figure out. I will also add, he's got a team with him. The reader will be introduced to his 2 lieutenants, Trevor Moreland and Regina Cortez, who assist him in figuring out what's going on. And book one will take the reader, I don't want to give out too much, but it becomes, obviously there's a serial killing going on with an underlying something attached to it, which will ultimately lead to a small town in northern Wisconsin, whereas the pieces sort of begin to come together. And it's about a 6-month time frame in the book of, the first moment to the finish line. And it becomes a set of serial killer chase, which they don't really realize they're on that until maybe halfway through the book, and they begin to pull together the threads of the clues that have been left behind.
So that's book one.
Yes.
Does book 2 follow in order then? And do people need to read book 1 first before they should read book 2?
Yeah, important question to ask. The answer is no. I wrote them as standalones. There is some references in book 2 to the first book, but they're not germane necessarily to the story arc of book 2. But there's a few, I'd say, very minor references. So no, you don't have to read them in order to do it. Slightly recommend it just so you get the whole picture in book 2 from some of those minor references. But no, they are standalones. And I also say in book 2, what I wanted to do is I wanted to free up Viceroy and his team from being part of this unit, because I wanted them to have, I wanted me to have the freedom to write almost any story I can think of if they were disconnected or pulled away from being over this special unit. That would open up doors for me to write, I guess, more creative stories. So in book 2, when it opens, that detective agency actually is being shut down due to budget cuts, that sort of thing. But he is hired immediately by a billionaire, former senator here in Wisconsin, who had lost his son a decade prior. His son was on a mission trip down in Guatemala, and him and the entire team went missing. It was a big story at the time. The results were nothing ever came of it after multiple searches. And Jurgen Sant is his name. Jurgen Sant hires Roger and team to go find his son because he believes he's still alive, and particularly based on a package that was left at his estate just a few weeks prior. And he wants the Roger to pick up the trail and see if he can find his son, believing that he's still alive. So that's how book 2 opens, and it gets Roger and team on an international chase for what's going on. Is he alive? Is he not alive? If he is alive, where is he? What happened? And it ties into something here in Milwaukee with a new drug that is beginning to hit the streets that has never been seen before. And it's not only is it extremely addictive, it's also lethal. And so the two storylines begin to ultimately intersect, and that's where book 2 takes us, is on this hunt not only for Bertram Sant, the senator's son, but also what's happening on the streets of Milwaukee concurrently, that, as I said, ultimately get sewn together as the book unfolds.
And your inspiration for Roger Viceroy, did that come from anybody in particular, or is he sort of an amalgamation of maybe different people you've known?
Probably an amalgamation. I mean, from a standpoint of other authors I enjoy, I guess, at or near the top would certainly be Lee Child's series with his character, along with some other ones I've seen in other books. Sort of an amalgamation of a number of characters there, and just my own sort of perception of what I wanted this detective to be. So, I drew inspiration from a number of other authors and sort of crafted my own person. He's, I guess maybe if I could say what separates him from others is his struggle with his faith is a common theme, and it is something where he's dealing with it most of the time. Now, I don't want to bog the reader down. Both books are very fast paced, very, very much in the lane of mystery and suspense. But one of his conflicts is what's going on with his life, and so I wanted that to be part of this as well, so that there's always something he's contending with as both books unfold, and any future books in their Viceroy series will continue with that theme.
Do you have any favorite characters that you've written? I mean, I'm sure the main character, Roger Viceroy, is important to you and near and dear, since you spend so much time with him in your head. But I often find that writers usually have some sort of favorite among their supporting cast of characters, because they enjoy writing that character, that supporting character. It's just, they're fun. They love them. They love to hate them, whatever the reason. Do you have anybody like that?
Yeah, in fact, I do. So, and as you kind of hit on it, as you write, you don't intend necessarily to do one thing or another in terms of leaning into favoritism, or boy, this character became something larger or wonderfully different than what you planned. But that sort of happened with me, and it gets into one of his lieutenants, the Trevor Moreland. His nickname is Silk. He's a guy from sort of the poor neighborhood of Milwaukee, who was destined for stardom in basketball, probably an NBA selective sort of talent, who gets shot his senior year of high school in the leg, and it destroys his knee, and he's unable to continue his athletic pursuits, and he ends up going into police work and becomes a top flight police detective in the Milwaukee police force. And so Viceroy actually grabs him from the police force in book 1. We don't get any of that in the story. That's just sort of the backstory that sort of comes out. But he grabs this guy because he notices how great he is for the Milwaukee Police Department, and he wants him on his team. So Silk has become really the reader's favorite too. I'll be honest with you. He's a very irreverent character. So in terms of the severity of what they're chasing after, a serial killer, or in this case, Bertram Sant, the hunt for Bertram, Silk becomes kind of a fan favorite because of his irreverence towards things that are going on. Not in a crusty bad way. He's just got this sense of humor and or outlook that's a little more Bill, I guess, than what you would think, and that comes out in his language, how he talks. But it's also, he's an unbelievably wonderful detective. He's an ace sort of talent level. And it's kind of well known that if Silk is on a crime scene, he usually will come up with something that others just would not, just based on his instincts and how he thinks and that sort of thing. So he's always on the edge of discovery, if you will, in most of the scenes he's in, just because of how he is. And I think his language and how he goes about talking, he's very serious when he needs to be, obviously, but he has this way of sort of, inserting this, in some cases, comedic sense of things without being negatively irreverent towards the subject matter. His colorful nature and how he goes about it. And the fact that he was who he was from his background, well known in Milwaukee, because he went on to, he was actually happened, I said high school, it happened in college at Marquette, a university based here in Wisconsin, where he had the gunshot on the streets of his former neighborhood is where it happened. So he's a well-known character in Milwaukee to begin with. And so he's just able to take all of that and just his natural instinct for how he handles life is one that I think people resonate with when they read him. And as I said, he's become a fan favorite. So I've even had suggestions from some readers to spin him off and do his own series just because they like him so much.
You've set the books in Milwaukee, or at least portions of the stories in Milwaukee. Mm-hmm. What is it about Milwaukee as a setting that you think aids the story, either the development of the characters or the development of your mystery?
Sure. I think there's two answers there. One, this is where I grew up, so there was a little, affinity, if you will, to the city. So that was a part of it. But I think, having grown up here, Milwaukee is a big, small town is basically what it is. I don't know where it ranks in U.S. in terms of market size, but it's certainly considered at best a mid-market, in some cases small market. So I think the nature of it being a small town allows for more, at least in my brain, more ability to write a story that has some kind of community connection to it. So it's not in New York or Chicago, LA, and those markets are fine, but they're obviously ginormous. And, there's certain stories to be told there, obviously. But Milwaukee, just with its setting, it's on the lakefront, Michigan, Lake Michigan. It's north of Chicago, about an hour. It's a vibrant, small town is basically what it is. You've got everything here, from theater to pro sports to the restaurant business to everything else. It's just it's a hardworking town too. It's its legacy is beer capital of the world, which actually is where Jurgen Sand got his billions in book 2. Was his family legacy is in the beer business. So I just like Milwaukee's sort of down home, small townish sort of mindset, and I think it just fits well with Viceroy and sort of where he is in terms of just being oriented towards the Midwest, oriented towards a smaller town in a big city environment. And I think for me, it was just more it just fit like a glove to put it here in Milwaukee for those reasons. And I just enjoy being able to write about Wisconsin. And so, to your point, Stacey, some of the book is away from Milwaukee. Book 1, even as I said, takes them out of Milwaukee into a small town in northern Wisconsin. Book 2 obviously takes them international, but everything's based here. And I just enjoy the ability to write something with my hometown that kind of keeps it in that sort of small community environment.
And the inspiration for your mysteries, do you draw from, say, newspaper headlines or conversations you have with people? Or where do you come up with the ideas for the mysteries themselves?
I wish I had a great answer for that. I try to think of a story that hasn't been written. I almost start with like a what if premise. What if X happened? What if Y happened? I guess having said that, I'll dial back to book 1 here for a second. So my parents grew up in a very small town in northern Wisconsin, and I had been many times up there. That region, the town in book 1 is a fictional town, but it's based on a small town in Wisconsin called Wabeno, where, again, my parents grew up. And so I was able to really draw from my experiences there. I needed a small town in the book for this to work. And so that's where I went with it. But I try to think of stories in book 1 to be just kind of put it out there. So my parents, having grown up in the 40s and 50s, when they got married, they were, she was a Catholic, he was Lutheran at the time. And that was a tough hill to climb for those two, as I come to understand, as they told me stories of their early years in terms of combining a Catholic with a Lutheran. There was a lot of bias in a very small town in northern Wisconsin, and they had some very stiff challenges with that. Well, I took that stories that my parents had told me. There weren't a ton, but there were enough to draw from, and I sort of flipped that into, instead of a religious bias, I flipped it over to a race-based bias, which you'll see in the book in book 1. So I did draw inspiration from their sort of tragic, in many cases, kind of tragic story of their early on years, and everything was fine. It's not like there was anything major, but there was enough there to draw from that the bias was thick. And I took it to another level in book one and flipped it over to a race base. But that was the inspiration for book one. Book two, honestly, was just what if there was XYZ, and what if this happened? And so I had not seen that in anybody else's thing. And I would say it's really interesting. I wrote that book two. It was completed and published in November of last year. So November of 21. And now we're in this sort of, drug crisis at our own border with fentanyl. And in many ways, a little prescient, I guess, to say, hey, there's a drug that is lethal and is ubiquitous and is poised to tackle America, and that is now sort of coming true with fentanyl. So it's not that my stories are wildly out of line. They think of I said, what if premises that have some reality based execution in terms of writing it. So it's not just, what if this story and you as a reader will sit back and say that's stupid, that would never happen. Well, I try to make sure that the stories are relevant and make sense and are something that can be, I think, sort of an everyday approach to the reader.
Do you ever feel a pressure to make the next mystery bigger, better, wilder, crazier than your last? Is there a pressure to up the ante every time? And how do you deal with that? Do you just go with that, or is it a battle to sort of keep things in check?
Probably a combination of both. I mean, from a writer's perspective, and I can only speak for myself, obviously, but my next story I want to write, I want it to be better than the previous story from a standpoint of me as a writer. Is it written better? Is a more tighter story? Can you do better as an author? And I think every author would tell you they probably start, even the great ones, every time they put a book out, they want to better themselves in terms of their writing. So there's always that challenge, Stacey. In terms of the story and the book itself, yeah, I mean, you want it to always be, wow, his first book, his second book were great. This one's even better. That pressure is always there, but at the same time, I don't write to that. I try to ensure that the story arc that I have in my brain and where I want it to go and what I'm trying to do with it is the bedrock of writing the story. So as long as I feel that it's a well thought out plot, a well thought out outcome, well thought out beginning, then I go with it. And I think just being that those creative juices, as they start to flow, yeah, you learn from your writings from the first two books, maybe certain things to think through, do, don't do, and you make the story better just from your writing capabilities and style. But the first two books have been very well met. If you notice any of the comments and ratings that you would see online, they're given both books extremely well received. And so, yeah, the pressure is there to make sure that continues. I don't know how to do that other than to just keep writing and to ensure that as I'm writing, I'm sticking true to my stories that I have in my head, as opposed to trying to outdo the previous book or two.
Yeah. Do you always know the ending when you start?
I do.
You
write.
do?
I'm not a sit down and write out every chapter and outline it. What I do is I know, well, first off, I know the whole story arc, and then I know the beginning. I know how I want it to end. And I usually know, 20% of the middle, give or take. There's certain things I know have to happen for me to get to the finish line. And from there, I just fill in the blanks. I begin writing. What that does for me, at least for how I write, it keeps me true to the story, but it also allows for creativity to come forth, because I've not filled in every single chapter in my head. It's like, well, I need to get to, I'm on point C. I need to get to point D that I have in my brain. How do I get there? And it may take 2 or 3 chapters to get to that next sort of nexus point of the storyline to happen. So that's how I do it. And I absolutely know how I want the book to finish, absolutely know how I want it to start. And I just then sort of write to fill in the gaps is the best way I can describe it.
Have you ever been surprised by the storyline when you're pantsing that sort of middle section? Has anything ever happened in the story that's made you think, I might have to reevaluate something I had already planned?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I have a confident enough, I guess, level of knowing that I actually want the characters to surprise me. I actually want surprises to come in the plot because I think that makes for a better story. And it has changed outcomes, not necessarily the finish, but how I got to the finish has been the change. And so that's just something I have the freedom to allow myself to get after. And that's how I write. So to your point, yeah, I'm actually open to them and wholly welcome them as the writing process unfolds.
Do you have plans for more books in the series?
I do in the series, yes. I've got the third one in the Viceroy series underway, not too far down the road, but I know what I want to do with it, and I know where I want to take it. But I'm almost kind of managing in my brain and on my computer now 2 stories. I do want to do a standalone story completely away from Viceroy. So that one is also underway. I think both of them have a lot of bite on mystery and suspense and action. And I guess a lot of my books have been compared to, if the readers read it, it's been compared to action-packed thrillers or action-packed mysteries. So it's a very fast-paced book, both of them. That's just my style. So I always have to land on a way to get a storyline in that is kind of bleeds into that, because that's kind of where I tend to thrive in terms of how I like to write. So yeah, Viceroy is back at it, hopefully, in the next year or so. And I really want to do this other standalone as well. I'm inspired by the storyline. I think it fits best not with Viceroy. It fits best just with someone else. And so, yeah, both of them are underway. And I try to write multiple points of view in all the stories, because I think that's also a way to, in my brain at least, or at least how I like to see things, provide the reader a fuller story if you're kind of getting viewpoints as the book unfolds from the characters involved.
Good. Well, if people want to learn more about you, your books, the series, look for new releases, things you have going on, where should they go to find you and that information?
Sure. The best place will be on my website, Stephen C. Harms, Harms, Stephen C. Harms .com. And most of my information, all my information is there. They can also catch me on all my social outlets, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So you can find me across there. All of those are also on my website. So anyone can go there and find everything they would need to know about me and how to get in touch with me and follow me.
Good. And if people want to purchase a copy of Give Place to Wrath or the second book, The Counsel of the Cunning, where can they go to buy them?
It's available wherever books are sold, either on the shelf and or orderable, also through Amazon, through Barnes & Noble, through any of the normal sites to purchase. And you can get it in an ebook and paperback versions as well. I will say the first book, if somebody looks it up, point of note, I changed publishers a year plus ago, and they wanted to reissue the first book. They acquired the rights from the first publisher because they acquired me, and they reissued the first book in June of 21. The first book had come out in 17, and so if everybody goes online to look, make sure they go for the June 21 version. Not that the story's different, but there's an updated cover, and a few things changed in the book, but not much, just some minor stuff here and there. So I would encourage folks to get the most current edition of Give Place to Wrath, not the older version.
All right. Well, Steve, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to wish you luck with your Roger Viceroy series, Give Place to Wrath and The Counsel of the Cunning. And we'll look forward to book 3, hopefully in the near future. So congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
And thank you for having me on your podcast. I appreciate it very much.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the bookshop at the end of the internet.